see them talk say make we off mind, but thank God say Maiyegun don come. So my people make you loud down, yo yo. Maiyegun don come, oh yo yo. My people make we shout, oh yo yo.
Maiyegun don come, oh yo yo. Let's first enjoy this reading. It may take us up to 15 to 20 minutes. I will take my time and then, maintain the speed. Listen along, and I hope my voice will be as cool as you would love to hear my reading as well, okay? Now let's proceed. Let's start with this. This was written by Akinyemi Mohammed Adidich. So the credit goes to the author. It was written in 2020. Now, when Abacha died in the early hours of Monday, June 8, 1998, many Nigerians did not know that their head of state had been partying all night till about 3:30 a.m. when his friend of 30 years, Lieutenant General Uzeni, left him alone to sleep. Abacha died before dawn from a heart attack. Nigerians' limited knowledge of Abacha was not restricted to his constant partying. Nigerians just did not know Abacha. SANNI Abacha. SANNI Abacha was born on September 20, 1943, in the town of Kano, northern Nigeria. Abacha attended the Gida Makama Primary School, Kano, before proceeding to the provincial secondary school, Rumfa College, Kano. Abacha joined the Nigerian Military Training College, Kaduna, in 1962, alongside Babangida, Sani Sami, Gado Nasco, moving onwards to have a prolific military education in Aldershot and Warminster, both in the UK, and a stint at Monterey, USA. Abacha was commissioned into the Nigerian Army as second lieutenant in 1964, going on to become the first officer to achieve a 4-star general rank without skipping any rank. And before becoming head of state, he married Miriam Jida, whom he met when he was in Rumfa College. They had 10 children together. In January 1966, a group of Nigerian soldiers within the rank of major eliminated top politicians and military chiefs in a coup. Northerners felt disgruntled because most of those assassinated were from the region. While civilian Londoners tabled their discontent before political leaders, soldiers also did in the barracks. Civilian and military leaders took diplomatic steps to call for justice, but young soldiers were not as patient as their civilian counterparts. The soldiers, including Abacha, went to meet Muritala Muhammad, whom mutinied and eliminated the head of state, a Southerner, then killed over 30,000 people. When the Nigerian Civil War broke out, Abacha fought in Muritala's 2nd Division, where he was promoted twice. Before traveling out of Nigeria in 1972 for further training, the Mutinous Act of July 1966 went unpunished. Otherwise, that may have been the end of Abacha. Khalifa Abacha, the coup plotter. After the Civil War, Abacha remained out of public limelight until December 1983, at which time he was the commander of the 9th Mechanized Brigade in Ikeja, Lagos State. On that day, he teamed up with several of his decades-long military colleagues and friends, such as Babangida, Buhari, and Brigadier General Ibrahim Bako, and Jerry Husseini, and Colonel Joshua Dongoyaro, to overthrow President Shagari in a coup. This was another faction of the July 1966 mutineers, taking over the government for the 3rd time Abacha's reward in the 1983 coup was his promotion as the GOC of Second Mechanized Division in Ibadan. Buhari was kicked out of government a year and a half later under the same pretext of corruption and ineptitude, which the democratically elected Shagari administration was overthrown. Abacha's 1983 coup speech has been described as a masterpiece adorning treason in patriotic garments. Abacha was becoming increasingly popular with coup plotting. When Babangida wanted to overthrow Buhari, he went to Abacha to get his support. And Abacha told him, "You are my chief. Anything you say, I will do." On August 27, 1985, Buhari was overthrown and arrested. He remained in custody for more than 2 years. This time around, Abacha's reward was the chief of army staff position. Babangida, a seasoned coup plotter himself, routinely dismantled the Armed Forces Ruling Council, AFRC, to prevent an overthrow of his government. Despite the constant shuffling of government, Abacha survived all purges, including the retirement of all service chiefs in 1989, and will be elevated when he saved Babangida from a coup in 1990. Organized by officers from Nigeria's oil-producing South-South region, a grateful Babangida promoted Abacha to the rank of a 4-star general, while also naming him as Minister of Defense and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. The press dubbed him Khalifa, King in Waiting. Babangida's fear and respect for Abacha, despite not being smart, would slip out when Babangida said he may not be bright upstairs, but he knows how to overthrow governments and overpower coup plotters. He saw my coming to office in 1985 and to my protection in the many coups I faced. Babangida survived 2 coup attempts with Abacha on his side. Khalifa becomes king. After 8 tumultuous years of the Babangida's administration, Babangida organized a presidential election that was a tempest in Nigeria's political history. The 1993 election banned politicians from Nigeria's First and Second Republic from vying for office, with 2 political parties, Social Democratic Party and the National Republican Convention, created by Babangida. Both parties fielded candidates, MKO Abiola, a wealthy Western Nigerian Muslim businessman, for SDP, and Bashir Tofa, a Northern Muslim, for NRC. While this is a story of its own, it is important to mention that MKO Abiola had been friends with both Abacha and Babangida for over 2 decades. Abiola amassed wealth through his relationship with the military and was sympathetic to military rulers who were his friends. On June 10, 1993, a shady organization called the Association for Better Nigeria went to court to prevent the June 12 elections from holding. ABN was backed by a multi-millionaire magnate named Chief Francis Arthur Nzeribe, an Igbo political fixer who had made his money in arms deal and sold weapons to warring sides during the Civil War. Even though ABN's objective and origins were obscure, it had been campaigning for an extension of military rule. With Babangida no longer commanding public support, Abacha was next in line and would become the head of state if a military rule was to continue. This intrigue was lost on many people. ABN's lawyer, Abimbola Davis, would hold a press conference on July 16, where he confessed that with the aim of prolonging military administration's stay in power, we were used in order to create an organized confusion. All of us who participated in this racket, never imagined that we would end up in the situation and that blood could be spilled. Abacha's intentional silence has been perceived by many as idiocy and allowed for a great miscalculation on the part of many, including Babangida. Despite the court case filed by ABN that elections should not hold, Babangida announced on June 11 that elections will hold as promised. It is noteworthy that the ABN was not a registered organization and did not have legal standing in a court of law. Elections held on June 12. By June 15, the NEC, National Electoral Commission, had released results from 14 out of the 30 states, including the Federal Capital Territory. The partial results showed that Abiola was on a course for a resounding victory. That was when the second phase of the plan was initiated. ABN went to court on June 15 to seek an injunction to stop the NEC from releasing further results. The Abuja court, under the Chief Justice of Abuja, Justice Dahiru Saleh, ordered the NEC to stop releasing results. But this decision was not unanimous, as contrary judgments were then handed down by a high court in Lagos and Ibadan to release the remainder of the results. Lagos State High Court Judge Dolapo Akinsanya also issued a ruling restraining the ABN from campaigning for an extension of Babangida's stay in power beyond August 27. On June 16, the National Defense and Security Council, NDSC, held a meeting where a committee was created to quickly investigate the aftermath of the election. The committee was headed by Abacha. Humphrey Nwosu, the chairman of NEC, at the committee meeting, recommended that Abiola should be declared the winner. He was halted by General Abacha, who asked him, "Who do you think you are? You conducted the presidential election the court prohibited. You helped to cause the current political confusion without the support of the member of your commission." Abacha plans was hatching. A faction of the military was brewing to prevent Abiola from becoming president. One of such persons was Brigadier General David Mark, who said, "I would shoot Shifami Abiola the day NEC pronounces him the elected president." Mark was loyal to Babangida, but also had a disagreement with Abiola when Mark was Minister of Communications. Like many top-ranking soldiers, they feared Abiola would exact vendetta on them upon assumption of office. Abacha used their fears to his advantage. David Mark later became a PDP high chief. David Mark from Benue State later became the Senate President of Nigeria under the Democratic Dispensation after the death of Abacha. Do you see what I mean? Nigeria reward criminals, especially if you are a criminal on the right side of the bandit. So if you are reading the news today that Nigeria is spending trillions of naira to pay terrorists in Nigeria, it didn't start today. It is what Nigeria is, paying and rewarding terrorists, criminals, right? Let us continue. While these theatrics were ongoing, Babangida was under constant pressure to relinquish power, but not to Abiola. Abacha was reported to have said, Abiola, retire me? God forbid. To put his pressure in perspective, Babangida's aides record military officers being in a combative mood and putting pressure on Babangida to retroactively void the election. When he attempted to explain the provisions of the transitions decrees to senior military officers, Professor Omoruyi was sharply reminded by Lieutenant General Dogonyaro that this is a military government. Professor, you are not part of it. Omoruyi, Babangida's aide and political advisor, would recount a visit to Babangida in which he said Babangida was a different man. He was very, very different, morose and cold in one corner of the sofa. In his account, Omoruyi said, Babangida told him, they will kill me. They will kill me. They will kill me. They will kill the president-elect, Chifemke Abiola, if I went ahead with the election and announced the winner on June 23. The election was officially annulled through a letter that was written by Augustus Aikomu's press secretary, Unduka Irabo. Does that name sound? Does that name ring bell? Unduka Irabo. You remember Unduka? Unduka later became, we'll continue. The shocking thing was that the letter was not signed, dated, not properly written. It was, in fact, a shock to many members of the FMG. David Mark said, I am not even sure Babangida was a major player in the annulment. On June 26, Babangida addressed the nation to confirm the annulment. As a swan song upon the annulment, which was still being challenged and protested, Babangida handed over power to a transitional interim national government headed by Ernest Shonekan from Abeokuta. There is a theory that Babangida promised Abacha the head of state position as a condition for supporting him in removing Buhari. Both parties neither admitted to nor denied this. To give credence to this theory, Babangida had a meeting with Abacha where he overturned his decision to retire with his service chiefs with him. Instead, he inserted a clause in the decree specifically stipulating that in the event of a crisis that made it impossible for the ING to function, the Secretary of Defense, being the most senior among the secretaries, should take over. Abacha was the Secretary of Defense. The ING consisted of politicians from SDP, NRC, and the FMG, Federal Military Government. But this did not pacify Nigerians, especially from Abiola's southwest region, who protested defiantly. Many southeastern Nigerians returned home, fearing that this may be another program. The emigration was called Osho Abiola Escape. While this was going on, politicians were also scheming across the country on how to reclaim the government. Ernest Shonekan's ING, Interim National Government, never enjoyed nationwide legitimacy, with attacks from all parts of the country destabilizing the administration. Oil workers went on strike. Airports were locked. Nigeria Labour Congress went to war. And Nigerian Union of Petroleum and Natural Gas Workers, NUPENG, joined the strike. As students also protested, Abiola was hell-bent on assuming office, and the military was not in support of Abiola. The October 1 editorial of Daily Times described Nigeria as a country trapped in the clashing, selfish, subnational agenda of fractions of the ruling class. Does that ring bell again? Does that ring bell? Let me repeat that line. The October 1 editorial of Daily Times, that is October 1, 1993 editorial of Daily Times, described Nigeria as a country trapped in the clashing, selfish, subnational agenda of fractions of ruling class. Abacha, a man of little words, did not make his intentions clear, but continued to gather support and sympathy. The military refused to help Shonekon stabilize the country as Nigeria continued to lose money because of the strikes. This was the final phase of Abacha's plan. Abacha had been using a trick he learned from Babangida: coup baiting. Soldiers used frustrations to gather support while blackmailing and abusing the efforts of civilian leaders. This time, because of Nigeria's collapsing economy, Abacha did not necessarily have to pay newspapers to publish articles against Shonekon's government. The work was half done by civil rights activists and union leaders. On November 3rd, 1993, popular human rights activist Gani Faweyimi said that the military must intervene to stop this rot, to stop this war of Shonekon's government against the people. Did you read that? Let me take it again. Abacha needed not to pay anybody. He needed not to, you know what I'm talking about? Eventually, a big voice from Yoruba land spoke. It was Gani Faweyimi. On the 3rd of November, 1993, popular human rights activist Gani Faweyimi said that, quote, the military must intervene to stop this rot, to stop this war of Shonekon's government against the people, unquote. The problems in questions were created by the military and were also allowed to fester by the military, which was a part of Shonekon's government. Yet, Shonekon took all the blame for it. Same way, Jonathan had to take all the blame. This was Abacha and Abiola. They were friends, by the way. All right. Abiola also contributed to this contraption by believing that the military was on his side. He advocated for the military to take over, stabilize the country, and announce him as president. Abiola's lousy nature soon forced him to spill that a reliable general was there for him in the army. Abiola's biggest friends in the army were Abacha and Babangida. Babangida had been forced to leave government, leaving only one general that comes to mind: Abacha. Abiola mentioned on September 28th that I really commend General Abacha because out of love for this country, he put his common sense, experience, tact, and intellect to ease out Babangida. I have no doubt that it is that common sense, the patriotism, that will ease out Babangida's surrogates too. Some believed that Shonekon was Babangida's stooge. On November 17, 1993, SANNI Abacha, Oladipo Dia, and Aliyu Muhammad Gusau met with Ernest Shonekon. Abacha asked Shonekon if he was going to resign. The officers did not take Shonekon's cooperation for granted. They had made contingency plans to deploy armor tanks in Lagos and Abuja if he refused to go. Shonekon resigned around 8 p.m. that day, November 17, 1993. And then there comes the sorrow, tears, and blood. Abacha. Before forcing the interim national government of Ernest Shonekan to resign. Abacha had served as the second in command to General Ibrahim Babangida for 8 years and had been involved in all of Nigeria's successful coups from July 1966 till 1998, except in 1975. In describing Abacha, Babangida said, "He is a man of a very limited words. He doesn't talk a lot. You can't predict him." When Abacha became head of state, media outlets had only one paragraph. Sorry, they had only, my dear, that was jumping there. Sorry. When Abacha became head of state, media outlets had only one photograph recitation of his military achievements. Abacha's inaugural broadcast as head of state was the fourth time he would address Nigerians. Abacha's silence was not the only power he had over adversaries. Taking a cue from Babangida, Abacha retired many senior officers, especially those loyal to Babangida. One of the victims of the retirement was David Mark. Mark eventually granted an interview where he divulged that Abacha had met some civil rights activists and monarchs in advance before taking over from the interim national government. The regime was supposed to end dramatically on 31st of December 1999, but Abacha switched the plan, betrayed the officers who worked towards the annulment of June 12 election and the subsequent tricks, and was on the path to making himself president for life. In Mark's words, Abacha's regime qualifies for a space in the Guinness Book of Record as the greatest betrayer of the century. One can only imagine why David Mark was so hot. Was it nationalism or removal from the corruption-laden national cake? Abacha never responded to allegations against him, barely addressed Nigerians, and when he did, it was often in interviews granted to journalists from outside the country. Abacha did not kill his enemy with silence, but also imprisoned them. On June 22, 1994, Abiola organized a rally where he declared himself as the president. This was, of course, after Abacha's reluctance to cede power to him. Abacha's betrayer warned "Eat Abiola." In response to the declaration, Abiola was arrested. Equating himself with Nelson Mandela, Abiola was telling a BBC reporter in a phone interview that he would come out of detention to become president. He said he wouldn't be the first African leader to do it. Abiola's prison to president fantasy was misplaced. Abacha was no longer his friend. He was at war. NLC leaders and some Abiola sympathizers tried to get him out of detention on condition that he lays low for a while. Abiola refused. Despite being appealed to by Dia, Abacha's second in command, and Obateju Osho of Okeono, Egbaland, Abacha heard about the plot and started distrusting Dia. Abiola's litigation team also went to court to ask for his release. Unfortunately, Abiola's newspaper, Concord, had accused 9 out of 11 Supreme Court justices of being compromised for receiving gifts of Mercedes-Benz cars from Babangida. 8 out of the judges sued Abiola, and the libel case was still in court. This meant that they would be impartial judges and not credible enough to hear Abiola's case. Abacha refused to appoint new judges. Abiola ended up spending the rest of his life in detention, dying on the day he was supposed to gain his freedom. He was not alone in Abacha's prison. Abacha's next stop was Shehu Yaradua, another coup profiteer, July 1966 to 1975. Yaradua retired from the military alongside Obasanjo in 1979. During Nigeria's civil war, both Abacha and Yaradua served in Muritala's 2nd Division. When Yaradua went to Pakistan in 1974 to attend a 10-month course at the Command and Staff College in Quetta, he sold his Mercedes 280 coupe to Abacha. This was also a complex family dynamic. There was also a complex family dynamic between them. Abacha was not his wife Miriam's first husband. Her first husband was Yaradua's father-in-law, Shehu Usman, the Sakin Musa, that is strict head of Funtua district in Katsina. Usman was the father of Yaradua's wife, Binta. Miriam was briefly married to Usman for 1 or 2 years before divorcing him and later marrying Abacha in 1965. Yaradua re-emerged as a politician in Nigeria's botched Third Republic. He wanted to contest for Nigerian presidency but was incapacitated by Babangida's refusal to admit old politicians into the Third Republic. He was the patron of SDP, the party Abiola contested under. Since Abacha emerged, Yaradua was constantly pressuring him to tell the public when his government will be leaving. Abacha's only response was communicated through Dia when he said, "Our stay will be brief." Also, Yaradua's constant protest pushed Abacha to hastily form a constitutional conference where delegates went to sleep, wake up, eat, attend brief meeting and cocktails, eat and sleep. There was a second conference where Yaradua was able to get delegates to give the military government a deadline of January 1, 1996. Abacha was enraged. He reportedly said, "I will get him, including that of Obasanjo." Obasanjo's crimes were similar to that of Yaradua. They had both condemned Abacha's government. Since leaving power, former head of state General Obasanjo had been in the habit of criticizing all of his successors, Shagari, Buhari, Babangida, Shonekan, and now Abacha. Shagari sent his secretary to the government to meet Obasanjo and ask him why he was criticizing him. Babangida reportedly met Obasanjo for advice. Abacha also met Obasanjo to seek advice on how long Abacha should stay in government. Obasanjo said, "You have no business being there, not to talk of how long you can stay." Obasanjo had a string of international connections that made him feared and valued. But Abacha feared no one. Also, while other head of state could not arrest Obasanjo for fear of public outcry, Abacha was busy jailing the public, the press, and their cries. Obasanjo was a stepping stone. To deal with Obasanjo and Yaradua, who were both friends and a thorn in the flesh, Abacha first arrested Yaradua. Then Obasanjo, who was out of the country when Yaradua was arrested, but close to return nonetheless. Obasanjo's continued detention was more controversial, as US President Jimmy Carter traveled to Nigeria on behalf of Obasanjo to appeal for his release. Obasanjo was then kept under house arrest in his farm in Ota for 2 months until June 14, when armed soldiers took him from his farmhouse to the army officers' mess. Before Obasanjo's arrest in February, the prolific rumor mill claimed that there had been an attempt coup against Abacha and that the government was secretly investigating suspects. Many people were arrested and tortured in connection to the said coup. Most of those arrested were journalists, politicians, activists, military officers not in support of Abacha, and retired officers. Abacha Step Up Special Investigation Panel, Abacha set up Special Investigation Panel led by Brigadier General Felix Mujakperuo to investigate the coup allegations. Felix was brutal in his approach. One of his henchmen was Colonel Frank Omenka, who was described as a ruthless interrogator with a large bag of physical and psychological tools that he used on detainees to extract information. One of his victims, Lieutenant Colonel Martin Azuka Igwe, said, "They tied my hands and legs behind me all together, and they put a pipe through my elbow, raised me up, and I was suspended like a chicken in barbecue. Then they were asking me questions, hitting me, abusing me, and saying that I must accept to have planned a coup. The chief torturers were Lieutenant Colonel Frank Omenka and Azan Zakari Biu." Another victim, Gabriel Ajayi, who had openly advocated for the validation of June 12 elections, was, according to him, brutalized, demeaned, dehumanized, humiliated, pulverized, tied up, tied down, chained to the wall, chained to the ceiling, abused, tied up like a barbecue ram, turned upside down and insulted. They wanted me to confess and make a statement for an offense I did not commit. On July 5, 1995, the accused faced a military tribunal. I will continue this reading some other day. Thank you so much for listening. It's been a pleasure. I didn't know it was going to take us that long, but it was a good reading.
Still them talk say, make we off mind, but thank God say, Maiyegun don come. So my people make you ladder, oh, yo yo, Maiyegun don come, oh yo yo. My people make we shout, oh yo yo.
Maiyegun don come, oh yo yo.